Hey, so this is a continuation from the video from this morning where I set up the composition of the shot at the other end of this path. So now here I am, I walk down the path, and again, this path I used as a metaphor. And from the beginning of the path, the metaphor here was where our civilization started, right? That it starts with Athens and Jerusalem, and it spans 2,500 years or more of intellectual thought and development, cultural thought and development, artistic thought and development. And so using this path as a metaphor, now I stand, or sit, I should say, here at the other end. And so what does this represent? All right, so this represents the topic, as you can tell from the title. We're going to talk about the myth of progress. Now, first and foremost, this does not mean progress doesn't exist, right? That you cannot, right? This whole idea of, well, things progress, you meaning you go from a toddler, a baby to a toddler to a teenager to an adult. Well, I mean, that just shows a natural progression, right? So how does it relate here where I'm standing at the end? Well, right now we are on the other end of what we'll call the beginning of, the myth of the West, right? And again, this also goes to the idea that myth or story is what we use to help define ourselves, the world. It gives things meaning, right? So, but there's again, and let me get back to the metaphor here, right? How I sit now at the other end of this path, where on the other end of this path was the beginning of history, right? And so now here we are at the end. What does this mean? Does this represent the end of history? Some of you who are philosophically inclined will know that's also another term that gets used. And what is that in reference to? Well, that's actually has, from what I understand, a Marxist, socialist, communist, from an intellectual perspective, connotations, meaning that the natural progression of history all leads up to a moment where things like religion and then eventually capitalism, right, give way to their eventual end. These are all things progressing towards an end. And of course, in the communist perspective, the end state is communism, and socialism is a state that comes before that. So, you have this prehistory, struggle for materialism, and, exploitation of people, the idea of capital, right? And then now it needs to grow out of that and progress from capitalism into socialism, and then finally end with communism. So that's kind of the philosophical origin of what we talk about, the myth of progress. But where else do we see this idea of progress and an end, right? And things leading up to an end, right? Or what is the ultimate end? Not necessarily as in the end of time or one's existence on Earth, right? As like a life or death thing, but more so in the philosophical meaning, right? Is there? Well, let me back up a little bit. There always seems to be the certain case that gets tied, especially in our modern / postmodern world, right? Of the idea that all of this stuff was prelude to now, right? And it gets often paired with technology as the main example of that, right? And so technology starts primitively, just like man did, right? In the caves, and then to the fields, eventually to the city, right? And then into the states, right? These collection of states now, and then certainly the modern world, we have nations, right? And paired with that is the technological advancement, like the material technological advancement, right? The advancement of tools, right? Stone Age, Bronze Age, and now, the age of modernity, the modern age, right? Science, technology, etc. And so too, within that, we see the theory of evolution, right? Where things are evolving. They have a beginning, but evolution itself opens us up to the idea that things therefore must continue to change and move forward. And it's this necessarily, the necessity of it is part of the myth of progress, right? Because we start when we hear things about it, if we hear about evolution, we can sort of see it promoted in the sciences, right? We also understand and see evidence of technological process, right? As tools get more advanced, right? Technology gets more advanced. Computers get more advanced, right? We didn't even have computers 100 years ago. You know what I mean? Right? Electricity, right? These are all technological advancements that seem to also match this idea that we're progressing towards something. And the myth of progress often uses these things as evidence that therefore all of existence and experience and life and us ourselves are progressing, evolving from a certain state towards an end. But this is where your philosophical inquiry has to step in and ask, well, what is it that we are progressing towards? How do we know that end once we find it? And another question sewn up here in the myth of progress is that actually true? Just because we see things like technology and science advancing and we have the theory of evolution, right? Which we can go into a separate topic a separate video to debate that at another time. But it enforces or imposes on us this idea that therefore change must happen. Evolution, progress is inevitable, and that is the myth of progress. That's the story that gets swept up, and we often find ourselves giving it meaning. We understand that or we get swept up in the myth, in that we believe that everything must be evolving and changing, and therefore it cannot be true that anything that came before us or exists now is in and of itself worthy of any permanence, right? And so what are some of the logical extensions of this? Well, transhumanism becomes part of this, right? If we have science and technology and we have the ability to transform a man into a woman through technological advancement, right? And we might consider that progress because it was something that could not and was not done necessarily before. The myth of progress takes over and says, no, this is the way it must be, right? Change must happen. So no permanence can ever exist, because in the myth of progress, how do we know what the end is? It gives us no end. It gives us no justifiable means for establishing what are the limits, or when we know we've reached that end, or what that end even is. You see? So that's just something. I had to take another walk down here to the, I got to get my exercise in and things out of my mind. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to stand at the other end of this walkway here to kind of illustrate this idea of the myth of progress as it relates to the video I did earlier this morning on Athens and Jerusalem as the foundation, as the beginning of our Western civilization. So again, trying to use cinematic composition here to emphasize a point, guys. So hey, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.